Hello, everyone. Today's topic is the gender study, gender issues in modern Britain. We have been discussing the Fabian Society, Fabianism in our last Zoom session. So Fabianism or the Fabian Society consisted of members who were like they were believer of socialism, but they were not like a very socialist like the Marxist Leninist ideology. So they incorporated the Fabians in the British society. They incorporated some of the ideologies from socialism, say providing equality to the poor, good housing, providing housing, raising wages for the poor, bringing reforms, emphasizing on education, and so on. So just to bring equality and just to, they are opposed to capitalism, a wide disparity. And so that is how they wanted to bring changes in the British society. So we have been discussing about some of the member of the Fabian Society, say, for example, the George Bernard Shaw, then Annie Besant, then who else? There were other, Emmy Wilson. I thought of discussing about her today. So these are the some of the H.G. Wells, some of the Fabian, the members of the Fabian Society. And they were mostly writers, novelists, and this is how they brought changes or tried to bring changes in the British society. So, for example, Annie Besant, I was talking about Annie Besant. So she was a socialist, a British socialist, a writer, Fabian member, and a women activist, educationalist, and a philanthropist. So at a certain point, she went to India and she took interest in the Indian politics, and it was British India at that time. And so she advocated self-rule or home rule, that is self-governance, and she also established an organization, and that is called the Home Rule Organization in India. So she supported the Indian causes and the grievances against the British government, but she advocated home rule, that is self-governance, rather than total independence from the British crown, from the Raj. So in 1916, she established the Home Rule League, and in 1917 she became very popular. So she was made the president of Congress, and she advocated activist work, but she did not. She and Mahatma Gandhi did not go along, because Mahatma Gandhi wanted total independence from the British rule. So, but Besant, she wanted some autonomy, like self-governing facilities from the British government. So, but not total freedom. So, so that is how later on she no longer was in Congress, and so Mahatma Gandhi started taking the leading role in Congress. So, and she was a philanthropist as well, and she was a founder of the Hindu University in Benares, I think, and she died in Madras, and she believed that through incarnation she became a British in this life, but in the previous life she was a Hindu. So she felt very at home in India, and she died in Madras, so she died in India. So this is another Fabian author I should mention, that is Emily Wilson. Emily Wilson is, she also, she was a writer, she was an advocate of human rights, and she was supported by the novelist H.G. Wells. I'm sure you all know H.G. Wells is a novelist, English writer of fiction and non-fiction. So his famous science non-fiction is The Time Machine. And so he initially supported the Fabian members, but later on he became critical. As I mentioned in the last Zoom session, that there have been moderate Fabian members who wanted changes through the existing political system, existing English running the existing political system that is running in Britain, and they didn't want any revolution, they didn't want any drastic change, they wanted change within the British institution. And whereas there were some members who were into more into the Leninist Marxist theory. They wanted more drastic action to be taken, and but then again there were also members like H.G. Wells, who was initially a Fabian member and supporter of Fabianism, but later on through his writing he became critical of Fabianism. He did not quite endorse their economic thoughts and so on. So there have been differences in the members, but we can see the shift in the British British society through these members. So with Emily Wilson, she also worked with her Charlotte Wilson worked. So this author's name is, let me check. She is I'm sorry, she is not Emily Wilson. She is Emma Brooke. Emma Brooke, Fabian feminist, writer, novelist. She was born in 1844 and she died in 1926, and I don't think so she ever married. And she was a campaigner of rights of women. And Emma Brooke died in 1926, and H.G. Wells supported Emma Brooke in her cause for the rights of in her campaign for the rights of women. And Emma Brooke had some issues with Bernard Shaw, but who excluded her from the Women's Tract Society. But overall, the Fabian group, women's group, was established by Emma Wilson in 1908, and Charlotte Wilson, who was more an aggressive member of the Fabian Society, and she joined the Extreme Fabians, the anarchist, and became the editor of Freedom magazine. But anyway, she also worked with Emma Wilson in the campaigns of for women's rights. Because women were marginalized, the notion was that the popular belief among men was that women belong to the kitchen. They are meant for childbearing, and they should marry and just bear children. And so that should be the status of women in the society. Some women did get the right to vote in some specified area of Britain, who were spinsters, who were older, unmarried women, and who were widower and who had property, but they didn't get the right to vote until 1928. So we can see with the Fabian female members, sometimes they are also supported by male members of the society, and for the cause for the rights of the women, in the campaign for the rights of women. So Emma Wilson was one of them. H.G. Wells supported her. Again, we discussed Bernard Shaw. George Bernard Shaw was also very sympathetic to women's cause and women's rights. So we can see the shift and the changes in the Victorian society. As Victorian society, as we know, Queen Victoria ruled for a very long time, and there were a lot of changes in the society. And again, we can see also through the literature and through the writings of the writers, they aimed to bring changes in the British society. So there was again the voting issue. As I said, that in 1739, some women who owned property, they could vote, but again, it was a special locality. It was not widespread throughout Britain. So to get the right of suffrage or the women's voting right, there emerged other women leaders. So for example, one woman was Millicent Garrett Fawcett. She established an organization, and the real purpose of that organization is to promote or is to campaign for women's right to vote. John Stuart Mill, as I mentioned earlier in our Zoom session, that John Stuart people, the Fabian Society, were more convinced, the moderate, the writers, novelists were more convinced with the ideology of John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill, he was a member of Parliament, and he he attempted to give grant to women's suffrage. He was not successful, but he attempted. So he had some philosophy that really blended in well with the Fabian Society, and the Fabian Society emerged after his death. So John Stuart Mill is someone who was a person who was more dedicated to economic reform, and so he was a philosopher, member of Parliament for the city of Westminster, was an English philosopher, political economist, and an influential thinker in the history of classical liberalism. He contributed widely to social theory, political theory, and political economy. So, he died before the emergence of the Fabian Society. Fabian Society emerged in 1884, and he died in 1873, but his thoughts were endorsed by the Fabian Society. So with regard to the voting rights, as I mentioned, that Fawcett was advocate of the women's suffrage, women's voting. In 1903, Emmeline Pankhurst and her daughter, Christabel, they resorted to violence, and because they thought that violence is the only way to get the voting rights, so they they provoked the violence, and so they resorted to civil disobedience to get the right to vote. Then later, and again during the same time, there was this woman, as I said, Garrett Fawcett, and she. This is another woman, contrary to Pankhurst. This is another woman, Millicent Fawcett, and she was also influenced by John Stuart Mill with his ideology, and she supported educational development, and she also wanted to improve the working class status of women. And Millicent Fawcett was a promoter of liberal and liberal university. She became the president of the National Union of Women's Suffrage, and she was a prominent member of liberal university. So she is somebody who was an activist as well, and she advocated full adult suffrage, and she favored the Labour Party, and she encouraged people to join the world, to encourage them to support the World War I and the World War I efforts. And so you can see that the society was like that. Some women had a very restrictive life. Some women didn't have any opportunity to work. They were placed under the category of childbearing, marrying and childbearing, like they have just the home duties. Some women worked in the factories, but again, the wages were very low in the factory. Men and women who worked in the Victorian age or the Victorian period, they did the same work, but women got the half wage. So they didn't get the same amount of wage as men. So these are the discrepancy and discrimination in the gender equality issue. And so later on, and during the war, the women did work as a nurse, and they had a very active role during the First World War. And so the society, the men were getting impressed with women's contribution, and so they were gradually their mentality was changing, that women should get some opportunity, equal opportunity in the society. So after the war in 1918, there was this act passed, Representation of the People's Act, and it allowed women of 30 years who had a property like land, and who were well-to-do people and who had the property qualification, they had the right to vote. And men of 21 years and over, they would vote. So still disparity and discrimination prevail, because women need to have property, they need to be well-to-do people in the society, and if they are for 30 years old, they would be qualified to vote, and whereas men will be qualified to vote at the age of 21. Finally, there was in 1928, there was this Equal Franchise Act, and this act was passed, and the Equal Franchise Act of 1928 allowed women over 21 years to vote. So finally, women achieved the same voting rights as men. So these are the shifts and changes we have been discussing since the last Zoom session, the Fabian Society, what is Fabianism, and today it's the discussion of women and their contribution for women's rights, and how they became activists, and how they campaigned, and how they worked in the First World War very actively. They helped the war cause, and literally that came to notice of men of the society, and that's how the men perception of women in a more has been changing in a more positive way. So there has been changes. Women have come a long way to get equality in the society. So for example, Margaret Thatcher was the first prime minister in Europe and the longest serving head of department in Britain in the 20th century. So she was She came to power in the 1970s, and she ruled for a long time. I have seen a documentary of a film of on Margaret Thatcher, how she felt she was very quiet and introvert, but in the meetings with men, she felt like maybe she's a woman. She was not given a voice. So all these things were adding up to her personality and confidence. So finally, she reached to the status of becoming the prime minister of the first women prime minister of not only of Britain, but in the entire Europe. Everybody came to know that she is the first women prime minister of Britain, but in entire Europe, there wasn't any prime minister, women prime minister before her. So this is a very big achievement in the British society, how women can from the status of belonging just a cornered and being home, and now they are into this. And they are now into politics. And then Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister, and she was UK and United States are a strong ally, and so UK and so there was this whenever there is foreign policy, there is strong alliance. They work together, and Margaret Thatcher and of Britain and President Reagan of the United States, so they went along very well in their foreign policy. And both the president and this prime minister, President Reagan of the United States and Margaret Thatcher of Britain, they were more of an aggressive sort of they had aggressive policy or some people, she's also known as an Iron Lady. So like, Iron Lady, and that means she has been very determined and very confident whatever decision she made in her career. So this is it for today's Zoom session. Now we know that in present day British society that how there are immigrants in the British Parliament. There are baroness in the House of Lords from immigrant background. There are some few baroness from immigrant background from Bangladesh, even from Bangladesh, in the House of Lords. And Siddiq Khan, he is the mayor of London, and his heritage is Pakistani heritage. And so there has been tremendous changes in the British society to the positive angle, to the positive side, more diversity, more incorporating women in the workplace. And Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher of Britain, is a unique example in the British society. Yeah, that's all for today. And so perhaps I will see you all in the next Zoom session. Bye for now.